Hello and welcome to the Books on Asia podcast, sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years, located at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your host, Amy Chavez. Today we have with us John Stevens. He's an author of over a dozen best-selling books on Japan, including in the martial arts, poetry, and Buddhism. Today he returns to the Books on Asia podcast to discuss his latest book, The Lotus Moon, Art and Poetry of Buddhist nun Otagaki Rengetsu. So welcome back to the Books on Asia podcast, John.
Yes, glad to be here. A little background on Rengetsu. She was born in 1791. She was a love child of a daimyo from Iga Ueno. She was adopted by a lay priest at Chioin. It's a big temple in Kyoto with a huge sammo. And she was raised at the temple until she was 7 years old. And she went to the castle in Kamaoka to train as a samurai lady. And she was, by all accounts, a great martial artist, even at a young age. And, naginata, sword work, jiu-jitsu, all kinds of things.
Okay, and she was born in 1791 and she died in 1875. So this is the time period. And was that normal at the time that a woman would train in those things?
Yes, it was very real danger being attacked, and so they had to be really well trained and also how to commit suicide. The proper way, binding your legs together, sitting in seiza.
Oh, gosh.
Holding the sword here and leaning on it, because that was also a real possibility.
And who would be attacking?
It was the Bakamatsu and the Loyalists, so the people who wanted the Meiji Restoration, so restore the emperor. The Tokugawa was in power 250 years or so, and they were crumbling. So that was the conflict. And it was centered in Kyoto. So there's a lot of turmoil and violence. Ueno is the ground zero for ninjutsu in Japan.
Okay.
This plays an important role in her life because it was part of her upbringing. She finished her service and she went back to her home. And she married, of course. She had a child, and the child died. And then a little bit later, she had a child, and that child died. And then she separated from her husband. And he was sickly and ne'er-do-well. And he died. And then she married again. Happy marriage. And that husband got sick and died. And when he died at age 33, she became a nun. And she shaved her head and became Lotus Moon. And she retired to a small temple on the grounds of Chioin. So at age 42, she was all alone. And so how can I make a living? There was no place for nuns really in Japan. There were no nunneries, things like that. But she learned how to make pottery. And then she started inscribing the pottery with her poems. So that became her main source of income the rest of her life. So she did that, but all the while she was learning calligraphy and painting and establishing a huge range of contacts with activists and artists, and like everybody in Kyoto was important. She was always popular in Japan. And then in the 20th century, she became very popular because of her remarkable life. She was such an exemplar of feminine strength, feminine power. So there was a 14th century monastery in Barcelona, and they wanted to establish a museum. So they built a special section, and they said, well, we want to have female artists from all over the world. And then they said, well, what about Rengetsu? Very strong, very powerful, inspirational. And so I was involved in that.
Right. And listeners can hear more about that on a previous podcast that we did together.
Yeah. And so I went to the opening, and it was beautiful night, full moon. It was perfect. Now this is where the story starts. And I got there, I did a talk and all this stuff, And 6 years ago, I had cancer. And so the beginning, it's low grade, non-invasive. First time. Second time, low grade, non-invasive. Third time, high grade.
Oh dear.
Invasive. Really. Anyway, I don't do melodramatic, but that was really, really tough. But went into remission. But then when I went to Barcelona for the exhibition, I started bleeding again, and the biopsy came back, well, it's here again. Anything that could go wrong went wrong. So that was when it started. I had written a rough draft, and I looked at it. When I finally got better, I couldn't remember a thing. I had amnesia.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't focus. I couldn't speak. And, the book is very complicated because the Japanese, the Romaji, the English, and the translation. So it's really a full-blown deal. I look at it, and I thought, oh, my God, I can't do this. It looked really at detail at the art, the calligraphy. It was so beautiful and energetic. And I was looking at that, and it really made me feel better.
Right. And this really comes out in the book, because the book is on this really beautiful paper. And you can see all of the artwork, you can see her calligraphy and the pieces of pottery, and you can really get a sense of what you're talking about. I was really touched by your description of holding that pottery bowl made by Rengetsu, because really there's something about touch that then connects it to the mind. And without that, then you're just looking.
So in Barcelona, I had 3 or 4 bowls with me, and I let the people come up and touch them. Which in a museum, you never do an exhibition. You never do that.
Right.
But they were my bowls. So I said, please come up and hold them. And, people were afraid to hold them and stuff. But no, go ahead. That was great.
And I'm sure that's what she would want as well, because that's why she's put her heart into all of these things, is so that they have a lasting effect. But she truly dedicated herself to her art.
But she raised money because her pottery was always sold out and her paintings were always sold out. But so she gave like thousands of dollars for famine relief. She had a lot of influence on Japanese politics. Many of the leaders of the Meiji Restoration were her disciples. In Japanese history, she's something as well. You can see I'm enamored.
The Meiji Restoration, and after was really a time for feminism too, in the Taisho period and all that. So she was on the cusp of change, wasn't she? And probably implementing a lot of it. And people were seeing what she was doing and feeling empowered.
It's, in Japan, I always thought that women have the real power because behind the scenes, the way they control stuff.
Yeah, no one talks about it, but it's quite true.
It's quite true. And even through history, the daimyos, their mothers controlled them and the wives controlled it. So I like that, actually.
Thank you so much for talking to us today, John. And the healing power of Rengetsu is something that will stay with all of us for a long time, I'm sure.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It was a great pleasure. I feel much better now.
Good. And be sure to pick up John's book. And you should be able to find it online or at Floating World Productions as well, right? From their website. I can leave those links into the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Books on Asia podcast, produced and edited by Amy Chavez and Michael Palmer. Logo by Alex Kerr. Sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years. They can be found at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your podcast host, Amy Chavez, author of Amy's Guide to Best Behavior in Japan and The Widow, the Priest, and the Octopus Hunter, Discovering a Lost Way of Life on a Secluded Japanese Island. For more interviews, book reviews, and other features, visit the Books on Asia website at booksonasia.net.